one constant feeling reigns over the 130-plus year history of NC State Wolfpack football. Hope. And when there's hope, well, Pack fans can always relate. Pack family, time for a true look at your team. Expert analysis, special guests, and a Carter Finley-sized bag full of X's and O's. Let's get hooked up for Pack Therapy. Here are your hosts, Tim Donnelly and Wolfpack great Mike Glennon.
Welcome into another episode of Pack Therapy, the podcast. I'm Tim Donnelly, Mike Glennon, former NC State quarterback, longtime NFL veteran, along for the ride as he always is. If you hear a little extra pep in our voices, it's because it's actually game week. We've been doing preseason pods, which are fun. You break them down, you dive into the roster. But it's UCONN and it's Thursday to open things up, which I would have loved as a player if you're opening up on a Thursday because, I don't know, that last week always took forever, and throwing it on a Thursday is awesome.
I actually had the privilege of being in a couple of those games. My first ever football game, we went down to South Carolina. We kicked off the season. We were the ESPN Thursday night game. I don't know if I've ever had more adrenaline the first time running out of the tunnel. I'm like, oh my gosh, college football is awesome.
Pre-week zero, actually kicking off all of college football. I just remember Thursday to Saturday, week one was always we've been over because you do the extra week of game prep for week one. It's we've been over this. Let's go. Let's line them up. And State goes to Stores, Connecticut for a UConn game to open things up. Well, we'll start with this. It's got a lot of trap game qualities, right? It's a team that you're going to be a big favorite over. It's on the road, so you don't even have the artificial boost of your home crowd, and you have Notre Dame staring at you in the face for week two. How do you combat that?
It could be looked at as a trap game, but I almost think it's the perfect way to open the season with Notre Dame coming in week two, because you're not playing a really inferior opponent where it's one of those super easy games where it's almost not reality, where then when you go against Notre Dame, it's kind of like a culture shock to the speed, to the size, to the physicality, all that. And then you go on the road to UConn where it's not necessarily going to be, going to Death Valley. And,
no disrespect to Stores, Connecticut.
Right.
In the middle of the forest.
And then you get that away game out of the road, and then when Notre Dame comes in town, Carter Finley is going to be an unbelievable environment because not only is it Notre Dame, but it's the first game of the year. So I actually really like this game. Now, at the same time, you got to take care of business because UConn is much improved, made a bowl game last year, so you don't want to sleep on them. But I actually really like the way this kind of set up to lead into week two against Notre Dame.
By the way, everybody, you want to stay tuned for the second half of this podcast because we have maybe the greatest player in UConn football history. After looking at their record book, Dan Orlovsky, ESPN personality, will be interviewing him about kind of the state of the UConn program and what NC State is up against. So we'll kind of build off of what you said and also the idea of the state of the UConn program. 15-point favorite, as I brought up, 85% chance of winning on ESPN's matchup predictor, which I guess is a algorithm. They use numbers. But you bring it up as this is not a team that carries that same reputation that, a quote-unquote tune-up game would be. I played in the FCS, so I don't like to throw around the FCS game to open the season, but the FCS game to open your season. Wake Forest on the same day is playing Elon. That has a different connotation than UConn. Do you try to keep it vanilla against UConn, or is this whatever play call you'd make against Notre Dame you make against UConn?
No, I think you got to go. I mean, Robert and I's got to figure out what they have in their playmakers. He's got to figure out the system. One game of showing what you do isn't a ton, so you might as well do it. It's not like preseason and football where the game doesn't matter. I mean, this game matters. It counts. So I wouldn't be holding anything back. Maybe if you get off to a big lead in the second half, maybe you dial it back. It's not like we're calling up trick plays and gadgets and all that stuff, and maybe you keep a few things in your back pocket. But, hey, we got to fire our gun and shoot our shot, because if you sleep on a team like this, that's the absolute worst thing you want to do is save something and have regrets.
So you bring up Robert and I. This is a very, very 2023 matchup. Right, where coaches are popping team to team to team every year, players are popping team to team to team every year in the transfer portal. Both of these quarterbacks, it's Joe Fonyo with UConn, who was kind of surprisingly named the starter over Taquan Robinson, who's a Penn State guy in the past, and Brennan Armstrong were with their offensive coordinators this year. Not last year, but the year before. Brennan Armstrong, we've talked a lot about it at UVA, was paired up with Robert Anae, and his last year paired together, they statistically went bananas. And then Nick Charlton, who is UConn's offensive coordinator, was the head coach at Maine until the last 2 years. He's been the offensive coordinator at UConn. Fonyo is transferring in from Maine, but he waited a year to follow Charlton. It's going back to their old offense, but also they've had a year to translate into another offense. Is that how difficult is it? And we're going to ask Dan the same question because both of you have been through so many offenses in your pro careers, not as much your college careers. But what kind of challenges are both of these quarterbacks facing being in a very unique but similar situation?
Well, to start off, I think it makes perfect sense. You see this happen all the time in the NFL where coaches either get hired or fired, and they bring former players that they're with, especially at the quarterback position. I mean, I just saw it yesterday with Josh Dobbs getting traded to the Cardinals because he was with their offensive coordinator in Cleveland the year prior.
Ron Rivera tried to win in Washington with like 60% former Panthers. So it all makes sense.
Yes. So for those guys, especially for the UConn quarterback, that he was up there all those years in Maine, just like Brennan Armstrong was with Robert and I longer than he was in this last season. So he's got 3 to 4 years of being in one system versus one. So it'll quickly, it's, like the back of your hand. They always say, like the back of your hand, and they'll revert right back. So I'm sure that gave him a competitive advantage against the transfer from Penn State, and that he had better knowledge of the system. He's gone out and executed before. I don't know a ton about the Penn State transfer, but I guess he probably has more physical upside.
Yes, but he was hurt last year, but yes, he brings a little bit more electric ability.
Right. So I think that shows the importance at the quarterback position, that it's not only physical, but it's so much more about the mental side of the game as well.
Not only physical. That leads me into I did some research. This question was supposed to be paired with the early ones, but I'm not going to waste this research. Can you out-talent a team? Now, again, I played FCS football, so we were very when we played a Division II team, we could out-talent them, but we were very rarely we recruited a whole bunch of dudes that the other team can't stand up to. I looked up the last 4-year recruiting averages for these two schools. UConn, 114th in the country, or the last 4 years is kind of their average recruiting class. State is 44th. Can you, is there a way to game plan where you say, hey, we brought it up during one of our last podcasts, 3 of the biggest athletic freaks according to the Athletics list of the freakiest athletes in college football. We've recruited just, better measurables, height, weight, speed. Can you play call a way to just dominate them physically?
I think you have to have a full game approach, because a lot of times when you play these schools that are less talented, they also have less depth. So you can wear them down. And then in the second half, sometimes you see a lot of these teams sometimes are hanging with the team in the first half, and then the second half it kind of falls apart. So I think you have to go in with the mindset of, okay, we just need to keep wearing this team down, and eventually that big play will come, or eventually we're just going to physically dominate them. So there definitely is an element to that. I mean, when you talk, that's a pretty big gap.
Huge.
That I'm sure the coaches are aware of, and it'll be both from a game plan standpoint, and it also could be a matchup standpoint. If we have a certain guy on our offensive line, or a matchup we like in the pass game, whatever it is, we can find that weak link and let's go attack him.
I always say you can tell when an offensive coordinator gets frustrated because if you have just to pick an example, like a stud left guard, all of a sudden they call 3 straight off tackle left or off tackle powers to the right with the guard pulling or whatever it is, and it's like, all right, he got frustrated. He just wanted to be the bigger, badder bully for a little bit.
There was 2 years ago when Icky was still school, run to his side was a very high number, which made a ton of sense.
And Zavala would have been over there too, right. And they might be starting next to each other for the Panthers to start this season. So that's when you get frustrated. And you're just like, that's it. Let our big guys be bigger and stronger. And it might happen, is what I'm saying, because you would expect with the recruiting differences and some of the development differences in these two rosters, you have to have advantages in a couple different places, not just one, like you might in an ACC game. speaking of recruiting, one of the recruits everyone's excited about, Kevin Casey Concepcion, listed as a starter, incoming freshman, did get there early on campus, so he's not brand new. I'm interested because I didn't redshirt, you did. Is there like and this is even bigger, is there a generation gap a little bit between the older guys and the younger guys? I'm looking at Brennan Armstrong. He's going to turn 24 in October, and I'm guessing Concepcion is kind of a, it's harder to find ages for guys fresh out of high school. He's probably 18, maybe about to turn 19. 5 years is a big difference to be like communicating, and they probably listen to different music and different they have different eras of Will Ferrell movie that they find funny, and it's I don't know, is there a generation gap?
At that point, there is, especially with the Rice transfer. I mean, that is a true generation gap. To your point,
Bradley Rosner's in 8th year. He's two recruiting classes older than even Brennan Armstrong.
Right, in the NFL, it happens more often. There are those true generational gaps where you're talking about a movie. Like, I don't know, I'd bring up like the Mighty Ducks, and some of the younger guys would be like, Mighty Ducks? I'm like, you haven't seen the Mighty Ducks?
Charlie Conway?
Yeah.
Goldberg? There's Matt Stafford reportedly is dealing with it right now, where he's like, I can't relate to these young guys. I never thought that would be a question in college, but I mean, turning 24 to 18 is
a big difference. And I remember coming in as that true freshman, that 18-year-old, and those seniors seem so old to you and so mature, and you still feel kind of like a kid, and they look like men, and you're like, whoa, this is a big difference. And
if there's a medical red shirt in there, it's like, oh, he's
right,
got a mortgage and kids, even though he's 22.
Right. So I'm sure maybe there's a little bit of intimidation at first for Concepcion, but the fact that he cracked into the starters, I wasn't expecting it. I knew they were high on him from the spring, but the fact that he's an early enrollee and day one listed as a starter, I don't know. I mean, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is that show that he's playing really well, or what we talked about with the concern of the receiver position, that no one really stepped up? But that's what we'll find out on Thursday.
Exactly. There's two ways to win a race. Either you run fast or everybody else runs slow. So let's hope it's he's running fast to end up at the in the starting lineup. Speaking of Armstrong, game one, what is success for him? Right. I know that's what so many people are going to be debating. I kind of want to put it out there ahead of time. What does success look like for him, so we don't overreact in any direction after game one?
I wouldn't even put like a statistical thing on it, but if I were, I would want to see upwards of 70% completion. I just want to see him out there executing this Robert and I offense, and him being the master. He should be running the show. I mean, he's talked about it a ton of times now that he's been in this offense, been in this system. So I just want to see him going out there, executing the offense, getting the ball in his playmaker's hands. Is very cliche, but he's been around for a long time. He needs to play like it.
And I would throw, even a more base level, this is for every quarterback, protecting the football. Right. If there's a turnover, even turnover worthy plays, I think would be something that would raise an eyebrow.
I agree, because that's something that he has struggled with in the past, particularly fumbles. He can be a bit reckless with the ball, and he needs to make ball security a point of emphasis. And yes, I want to see him protecting that football, being smart with it, both in the air, in the pocket, when he runs, because with this defense, you don't want to be putting them in situations where they're on a short field, and in a game like this where a potential trap game, don't give them any chances with turnovers.
Before we get to Dan Orlovsky, who will be joining the podcast here in a minute, anything else that you're like particularly watching for? I know that in this game especially, everyone's eyes are going to be on Armstrong for the most part, but that first half, is there anything that you have earmarked?
I want to watch the receiver position, and I just want to watch the overall scheme. What does this Robert and I offense look like? And are they doing a lot of shifts? Are they doing a lot of motions? Who are they trying to design to get the ball to? So, yeah, my big three would be Brennan Armstrong, Robert and I, and then the receivers as a whole.
There you go. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, the best quarterback in UConn history on UConn Week for NC State joins Pack Therapy. Dan Orlovsky of ESPN coming up after this. Welcome back into Pack Therapy. Joining us now, Dan Orlovsky. I did some research on the intro here. So, Dan, first of all, you can find him on just about every ESPN show. Monday Night Football a few times throughout this year. NFL Live, obviously. Get Up. He's all over your television and radio. I also, Dan, I don't know if you're aware of this. I looked up the UConn record book online, and the first page is just the picture of Dan with the caption that reads, "Dan Orlovsky is the Huskies' all-time leader in virtually every major passing category." So he comes with his UConn bona fides on UConn week for state football. And maybe most importantly, he was the officiant at Mike's wedding to his lovely wife Jess. So I ask both of you to get things started. Are we friends this week? Are we rivals? I know you go way back, but I mean it's game week, so there's got to be something, right?
Definitely friends. I'll always be friends with him. I'm not rooting for him on Thursday. I hope he wakes up Friday in a bad mood. But always friends.
We're more than just friends. I remember when he was on the Dan Patrick show, he said he married me. He didn't use the correct terms, but he actually said he married my mother.
So.
He performed the act of marriage for you and your wife. He didn't. I get what's going on there. Let's. I mean, first of all, thank you for taking the time to jump on Pack Therapy here.
Of course.
I want to ask this to just get things started. UConn has 3 ACC teams on the schedule this year, this being the first to open the season. Are we thinking this is an audition? Is the ACC your dream conference for your alma mater?
It's such an interesting question when it comes to UConn, mainly because I think UConn, and I think they're at the point where they embrace this. Like, they are a basketball school at the first step, like first and foremost. And that's okay. It's one of the best premier basketball institutions in the country. And then they've had moments of a lot of their other sports are really good too. And then they've had high moments or relatively high moments of football. So, the question for UConn is like, what conference, if it becomes available as an option, can you still be a top 5 blue blood in basketball and maybe elevate the football program or help elevate the football program while also not hurting the other sports and mainly basketball? And I think, the ACC is obviously interesting. Years ago, there was the conversation that UConn was going to go, and then they got blocked by Boston College and Syracuse.
No bitter feelings, right? None at all.
I'll keep my feelings to myself on that one, but I think that as long as it works out for all parties and not just football, I think it's certainly worth a conversation.
And we'll go back to the name of this podcast is Pack Therapy because it's supposed to talk about the highs and the lows of kind of being an NC State fan. And unfortunately for you, there was a high moment for NC State back October 11th, 2003.
Right after we said you're still friends, he's going straight here.
You just stole the question. Me and Tim talk about how quarterbacks, we have this memory where you can name a play, whatever touchdown, kind of like what Sean McVay does, where you name a play that happened and you know the exact play call. I was going to see if you knew the name of the player that had that interception at the end of the game. And you answered it.
All right, so Freddie Autry-Lindsey is the answer. It's not just that play, because I get heat from this just as much as I get heat on social media about running out of the end zone. I get heat from my boys at UConn that were on this team because we were down at North Carolina State. They had P. Riv. Who was the tailback that was really good?
T.A. McClendon.
T.A. McClendon, man. Jericho was there. Mario was there. Long story short, we were an offense that, gave me a lot of freedom at the line of scrimmage. Tons. I could do kind of whatever I wanted at this point. In the game, I think second or third quarter, I'm getting pressure off my left side. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to call fake run to the right, get them to over pursue, and I'm going to run like a bootleg. And I'll be wide open by myself, but so will the wide receiver.
This sounds like a genius playing with your speed. I mean, I know where this is going.
Well, I was mainly getting it to get the crosser wide open. I call it. Freddie Autry-Lindsey does not bite on the fake. I come around the fake, hits me, ball out, fumble return, touchdown. And then what happens is we're down 14 in the fourth quarter. We score. We get the ball back. Our defense played off. Unbelievable. we score again. We drop a play in the dirt, like literally on the sideline. I'm like, hey, safety's doing this. If we do this and do something else, it's a touchdown. We score, tie the game. We get the ball back with like 2 minutes left, maybe a little bit less than that. We start going on a drive to try to kick a field goal. And again, I see a pressure coming, and I'm like, got him. So I changed the play at the line of scrimmage thinking I know the pressure, and I try to throw like a skinny post backside. I guessed the wrong pressure and threw the ball right to Freddie. And I just remember like running, diving to go tackle him, missing by like probably 20 yards, and looking up and seeing him score as I laid on the ground and being like, yo, I can't. I don't know. He scored with maybe 30 seconds to go or something. So
5 seconds, according to the UConn website.
It's the UConn website. You got to pull some strings and get that bad boy taken down. It can't be on the UConn website.
Freddie was a GA for me when I was in school, and now he's actually the Nichols coach for NC State.
Man, I'm going to walk over to him before the game on Thursday night and have some words.
Just let him know. Obviously, and everybody knows, from your work in the media, the level to which offensive football. This game's kind of interesting in that both quarterbacks have the same offensive coordinator that they had, or head coach that they had 2 years ago with a year off in between. How easy is it for quarterbacks like this, Armstrong and Fagno, to kind of weave in and out of offenses, right? Both you and Mike have had a opportunity to learn a billion different offenses throughout your careers in the pros. Like, is it like riding a bike? Will they both be able to jump back in with the OC and get right back on the same page, or is it more of a battle?
I think it's easier the more you go through it. I think it gets easier, probably not necessarily at their age, but kind of to the point where I got in my career, and certainly Mike, playing for so many different offenses. So I think the challenge for those guys is they had probably gotten to a point where you feel relatively like you've mastered a certain offense. Like you've got everything about it. You know everyone's job. You see the picture right when the play call happens. You know why the play call is getting called. And then you have that year in between, and you kind of live in this, walk the line mode where it's, maybe I'm in a little bit of a new offense, or I've got a little bit of a new play caller, and he's calling plays for different reasons. And so you try to forget some of your past and learn some of the new kind of present and or future. And now you're reverting to some of the stuff you did 2 years ago. And so you've just got to really try and stay as focused as possible on understanding kind of why play calls are happening. And, I would imagine for both guys, there's a really high level of comfort, a really high level of belief, because both were really successful in those situations. So while there are some challenges along the road, I don't think there's probably much right now. There's probably a greater level of confidence and comfort.
And we talk about these two quarterbacks. Brennan Armstrong came from Virginia. Know you call a lot of games. Did you ever cover Brennan Armstrong?
No, I didn't cover him. But obviously saw him a ton, calling a relatively high amount of ACC games. I know 2 years ago he kind of lit college football world on fire. And, incredible athlete, tough dude, can throw it around a lot. And kind of a really, really high end college football player. So, not having the chance to call any of his games, but did have the opportunity to watch a bunch of them on tape.
Dan, how'd you end up at UConn? Just to kind of take it all the way back from the beginning, were there dreams of coming south, or did you just love the cold weather where you grew up so much that you're like, I'm just gonna stay right here?
No, yeah. So I started getting recruited from UConn as a sophomore, but I was really getting recruited by, I want to say, everyone east of the Mississippi, for the most part, and a decent amount of schools in the South. And I wanted to get out of Connecticut. I wanted to go. I originally committed to Michigan State, and I was a junior. I wanted to play right away, and that was a big deal to me. And they had a true freshman named Jeff Smoker playing, and as a true freshman, he went on a 5-game tear that was sick. And I was like, well, I'm not going there because I want to play. I decommitted. I took a visit to Purdue. Drew Brees was actually my host. I loved it. I came home. I was going to commit to Purdue, and then that Tuesday morning, Kyle Orton, who was the number 3 or 4 ranked quarterback in the country that year, committed. And I said, well, I'm not going to Purdue. took a visit to Virginia, and I loved UVA, and George Welsh was the coach. George Welsh kept calling me Matt. My host was Matt Schaub, who is my dear friend. And I just remember being like, this dude can't like me that much. I kind of came home, and UConn throughout that whole process was really, really, recruited me heavily and kind of sold me on like, we'll go do what people say we can't, and new stadium, all that stuff. And I just came home from the visit, and I got kind of tired of it, the recruiting process. And I just told my dad, like, I'm going to go to Connecticut. And he thought I was nuts and didn't talk to me for a couple of weeks. But, I felt compelled to follow the challenge at that moment, try to go do what people thought was pretty impossible to do, and kind of wanted to play right away. So that's really how I ended up there.
What about our guy, Tom O'Brien and Dana Bible? I thought there were some BC aspirations.
I would love BC was my dream school. I would have loved to have gone to Boston College. I went to camp there like 6 years in a row, but they never offered me. So it wasn't Tom. Dana Bible was actually one of the people that like helped me learn like really how to throw a football with the way he coached me at camp. But Boston College came to my school in high school, and I won't share the coach's name who said this to me, but he was like, "Listen, man," he's like, You're like a pretty girl at school, but we want the prettiest, and that's why we're not going to offer you." And I was like,
"Who'd they go with that year?"
They went with a dude named Quentin Porter out of Maine.
I remember, yeah.
That's the prettiest right there, Quentin Porter out of Maine. I know we don't want to keep you too long. 30 seconds on Drew Brees, the recruiting host. What was he like? Was he making you go like 5, 4, 3, 2? We're gonna work hard. Like what was the Drew Brees as the recruiting host?
Not gonna lie. So he took me to their indoor facility one day because he needed to throw during the time that I was there. He wanted to throw, and he threw to a receiver. I think his name is Chris Daniels. And watching him throw routes on air, I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, every ball was perfection.
Was it a bit? Was he trying to show the young guy on campus like this is what you're walking into?
No, I think he just needed to go get his work done, and he was like, "I'm gonna go, throw if you want to come." And I was like, "Absolutely."
So did that make you realize, like, when Drew got to the NFL and had a career, like, was that a wake up moment? Like, maybe my career isn't going to be on the same path as Drew.
Maybe I should go to UConn. No, it was impressive. It was like one of the things that I took away from it was like, dude, if you aren't elite with your accuracy and it takes thousands of reps to get really good at that, you don't have a chance.
Well, I saw you were at UConn practice last week. Last year, UConn came to NC State. I was at the game in Raleigh, and they looked like they were struggling. Jim Mora gets them back on track at the end of the year, and surprisingly, I look up in their bowl game. What's kind of the state of the program? Where do you see this team headed?
Yeah, I think it's really encouraging right now. So I went back there, and I know it's not last year. I went back there for spring around like 2018, and I remember walking in and being like, oh my gosh, what happened to this team? They didn't even look like a Division I team. Honestly, I don't even know if they look like physically. They just didn't look like that. No size, no girth, no thick legs. They look like me. And I just remember being like, my goodness. And so I went to practice last week. I took my boys, and just walking in, that was one of my big takeaways. Like, oh, you guys look like a real football team. Like, you guys look like a real college football team. You go around about practice like a real college football team. So I think that is just super encouraging. They are a very competitive group, which is really cool to see. They've got size on the perimeter, which I'm excited about. I'm not sitting here telling everybody that this is Georgia's offensive line, but I think their offensive line's got a chance to be a really good unit. And so I think like the state of the program is building off of last year, super encouraged. If they stay healthy, they absolutely should be in another bowl game. And really like the question off of that, Mike, is this like, can they keep them? I think that's like one of those catch-22s that you probably hope for come December is the season goes so well again. can you keep Coach Mora? But I'm excited to see kind of what happens this year because they look solid.
Dan, good luck with everything you have going on. We'll continue to watch. We love your breakdowns on NFL Live. Keep mastering the touch screen and everything else we see. So appreciate you for jumping on Pack Therapy.
And one last thing, Dan, probably don't say this enough. I don't think it's ironic that my best career or year of my career in the NFL was with you. So I'm super happy that the whole world gets to see your knowledge that you pass on to me. So thank you.
Oh man, I appreciate that, bud. I'm a big fan of you as a player, bigger fan of you as a person, man. You earned it. So it was fun, man. It's always nice to look back and see kind of people kind of go live out what they're capable of. So, I got love for you and your fam, and I appreciate that.
Appreciate it, Dan.